I'll tell you, wasn't yesterday a beautiful day? In fact, it looked as beautiful as it is today, right? You know, it was the kind of day when you could do all kinds of stuff, especially outside. Of course, for me, yesterday was a little different because I don't know if you all know it. My wife and daughter are visiting Debbie's family in Indianapolis right now. And so it's just me and the dog. And because of that, I think y'all know exactly what I did yesterday. Right? Y'all know what I did. I spent almost the entire day thinking about immorality and in particular adultery. Now, to be honest, that's not entirely true. I also did a wedding and got together an agenda for our session meeting. But other than that, you got it. Immorality and adultery was on my mind. Of course, I hope y'all know it's really not the way it sounds. About a month ago, we started a series that I'm calling Kingdom Living, and each Sunday we're looking at what the Sermon on the Mount has to say about how we might live as followers of Jesus Christ. And to this point, we've talked about the Beatitudes. You know, how folks who were either born with certain disadvantages or who choose to live lives of dedicated sacrifice. We talked about how they're actually blessed, you know, how they're fortunate because God will balance the scales later. And then we looked at how we have a responsibility to the world, you know, to be its salt and light, as well as a responsibility to God to live good moral lives. And then last week we considered both the problem with anger and why we really need to get a handle on our temper when it sort of gets out of control. Now, that's what we've already covered. And this morning, as we continue to move through these lessons, we're going to talk about what Christ taught his disciples about adultery and immorality. I mean, just listen to what Jesus said according to the evangelist Matthew. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. Now, that was what Jesus said. And so it was on my mind yesterday. And I'll tell you, as we look at it just as it is, I think this is a pretty relevant passage nowadays. I mean, with all the focus on #MeToo, it would be hard to say that important and powerful men haven't tarnished their images and their reputations with adultery and other sexual sins. And so a sermon on adultery all by itself might be more than appropriate. But this morning, we're going to broaden our focus a little bit, and I'll tell you why. I think what Jesus said about adultery can apply to a whole lot of other immoral acts that we might be better able to apply personally. And since what Jesus taught was directed to his followers, in other words, to them and not the entire world, we're going to keep our focus on believers, you know, on us. And so with that in mind, we're going to talk about why Christians slip into some behaviors that they know are just plain wrong. You know, why they sort of drift into immorality. But more important than that, we're going to also consider how we might prevent it from happening, something that I believe can come in handy to us all. Whether we're talking about actions that are considered pretty big, you know, like adultery and theft, or acts that may be relatively small, you know, like telling a little white lie or passing on a juicy rumor that we know probably isn't true. And like I said, I think all of us can squirm a little bit when we think about this kind of thing happening. Because let's face it, most of us know, man, we know it's really easy to say things that we later regret saying and do things that we later regret doing. And even though the specifics may vary, I think there are some very definite reasons why people drift into immorality. And I'll tell you, I think we can see the reasons right here in the passage I just read. For example, I believe a lot of us make the mistake of focusing on the act itself. Assuming that if we haven't done the deed, man, we're fine. And I think that's why Jesus started his lesson by saying, you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. Now, kind of focusing on the act, right? But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I remember years ago, I was working with a couple whose marriage was, well, I think you could say it was kind of shaky. And it was shaky in part because the wife caught her husband having a lot of really intimate and explicit conversations with several women online. But I remember as we were talking about it, she kept going back to the fact that he'd never really committed adultery. Now, he fantasized about it. He talked about it. Man, he even shared his very specific fantasies with other women, and they did the same for him. But for her, technically, the marriage was still fine because he'd never done the deed. Now, that's what she said. And frankly, I think a lot of Christians sort of share her perspective on immorality. You see, they think the sin really doesn't affect them, and God will certainly never hold them accountable until the room is paid for, right? Or the money is actually removed from the till, or the red blood is actually shed. And like I said, I think that's a problem. That idea is a problem. Because as long as we focus on the deed itself, we completely miss Jesus' point in these verses. You see, according to what he wrote, whether it's adultery or stealing or murder or anything else you want to include, immorality begins before the action itself. As a matter of fact, it actually starts with an inner desire. And that's what the Greek word translated lust actually means. As a matter of fact, when Paul was writing about the law, he used the same word, and it was translated covet. Just listen. What then should we say? Is the law sin? By no means. Yet, if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity in the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. Apart from the law, sin lies dead. And when he contrasted the spirit and the flesh, Paul used the word again, the same word again, but this time it was translated desires. Live by the Spirit, I say, and do not gratify the desires of the flesh. For what the flesh desires is opposed to the Spirit, and what the Spirit desires is opposed to the flesh. For these are opposed to each other to prevent you from doing what you want. Now that's what he wrote, and so you see this one word was translated three different ways. But I'll tell you, it really doesn't matter whether the word is translated lust or covet or desire. It still points to the same thing. Immorality actually begins when we lust after or covet or desire something another person has but that we want. In fact, we want it so badly that we'll do whatever it takes to get it. And for Christ, once we allow this desire to push its way to the front of the line, it's really only a matter of time before we take action. And the word he used for this action, the word he used when he said, if your right eye causes you to what? Sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. Well, it's not the usual word for sin. In fact, the Greek word is, get this, scandalizo. Scandalous. And it refers to a person who stumbles or falls away. For example, Jesus used it when he talked about what was going to happen to his disciples after his arrest. When Jesus said to them, you will become deserters. Scandalizo. Because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. Peter said to him, though all become deserters, again, same word, because of you I will never desert you. Of course, we know what happened with Peter. He stumbled. He fell away. And if the same sort of thing happens to us, that's a big deal. As Jesus said, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body to go into hell. Of course, this word translated hell, well, it really has nothing to do with a metaphysical place of eternal torment. The actual word is Gehenna. And Gehenna was the name of an actual valley on the south and east of Jerusalem. But it had a horrible reputation because it was there where the people of Judah, during one of their bad times, sacrificed children to the god Moloch, something that the prophet Jeremiah described. For the people of Judah have done something evil in my sight, says the Lord. They have set up their abominations in the house that is called by my name, defiling it. They go on building the high place of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command, nor did it come to my mind. And so Gehenna was a horrible place with a horrible history. A place of cries and pains and lamentation, a place of complete separation from God and righteous society. And so if living in that valley is your goal, if that's where you want to put your dream house, let your eyes and hands and feet and spleen and heart and mind cause you to stumble into sin and to desert God. And I'll tell you, the easiest way for that to happen is to forget that immorality actually exists long before the actions are taken. And because that's easy to forget, I think that's why Christians can slip into immorality. But I also think that offers us some direction about how immorality might be confronted and prevented. You see, in my opinion, the time to nip immorality in the bud is right after those unhealthy desires arise and before the stumbling actually occurs. I mean, duh. And I'll tell you, I think that can be done if we decide to do three things that I believe can make all the difference. For example, if we want to confront immorality in our own lives, first, I think it's crucial for us to be honest with ourselves. I mean, let's stop justifying the desires that we have or trying to find someone to blame when those feelings move us to act. For example, a woman shouldn't try to justify the kind of lust that leads to adultery by blaming her husband, no matter how self-centered and obnoxious he may be. And a man shouldn't try to explain why his coveting of his neighbor's car led him to cheat his Uncle Sam by blaming society, even if everybody actually is really doing it. And we shouldn't overlook cruelty, and we shouldn't overlook murder by listing the reasons why it's okay. Before it gets out of hand, we need to look at our desires for what they are, a mixed bag. Some positive and others negative. Some directed to God and others focused on self. Some that lead to righteousness and others to Gehenna. And if this self-directed honesty causes us to feel uncomfortable, well, we're in pretty good company. This is what the Apostle Paul had to say when he compared his actions with his intentions. He wrote, I do not understand my actions. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. And so I find it to be a law that when I want to do what's good, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my innermost self, but I see in my members another law at war with the law of my mind, making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members. Wretched man that I am, who will rescue me from this body of death? Now, if this is a struggle for Paul, the super Christian, why should we expect it to be any easier for us? I'll tell you, we really need to be honest with ourselves. That's one. And second, after being honest about the desires we're experiencing, that's the time we need to be open to others. And I'm not just talking about our fellow brothers and sisters, but also to God. And let me be straight with y'all. Being open means listening to things we may not want to hear. And that's what openness involves. And friends, that can be really uncomfortable. You see, when I'm fired up about doing something, man, I have justified my action, even though deep down I know it's wrong, but I am determined that I'm going to do it because this is what I want. It's really tempting to trust my own judgment. You know, even to spiritualize my own judgment. Well, it's okay with God. And then to seek out only folks I know already agree with me. I'll tell you, when the desire to possess and the desire to control is really strong, man, I don't want to hear somebody tell me that going for it may be wrong. And yet that's exactly what I need to hear. I mean, if the lust is leading me towards adultery, I need to hear how it's going to affect my family and my friends and my church. And if coveting is going to lead me to some questionable actions, then I need to hear someone tell me that maybe I should question whether what I want is worth the price I'm willing to pay. And if my desire to avoid trouble or to be popular, to run with the cool kids, pushes me towards saying things that I know aren't true and doing things that I know aren't loving, I desperately need to have someone remind me that it's really lonely to feel separated from God and my good friends. Gehenna is not a pleasant place to be. You see, because they might tell me some stuff I don't want to hear, I need to be open to others if I want to get a handle on my desires. And that's the second thing I can do. And third, after deciding to be open and honest, I need to be strong in resisting the pull. Man, we shouldn't fool ourselves. When we give into our desires, we're not victims. And we shouldn't try to convince ourselves into believing that resisting temptations is easy. In fact, it may involve making major changes in our lives, like avoiding some folks who seem to stoke the desires. And those situations in which we find it easy and comfortable to do what's wrong. It's kind of like an addict who knows exactly, he knows exactly what's going to send him in a downward spiral, ruin everything he's built up during his life or accomplished since he was sober. And yet there are times when that drink or that drug seems to be the most desirable thing in the world. Man, it's tough to avoid slipping down that slippery slope. And for that reason, I think it's really important that we remember that we don't have to face this challenge alone. God is always with us, and so are our Christian brothers and sisters. And along with that, we also need to remember that when we resist, the results are going to be well worth the effort. It's like John wrote, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. The love of the Father is not in those things who love the world. For all that is in the world, the desire," there we go, same word, "the desire of the flesh, the desire of the eyes, the pride and riches, comes not from the Father, but from the world. And the world and its desires are passing away. But those who do the will of God live forever." Man, it takes strength to do what's right. And that's the third way we confront immorality. Of course, just knowing why Christians slip and how we might deal with the slippage, well, that won't save us from those desires that move us in the direction of immorality. I mean, just because we understand that a lot of folks focus on the acts themselves and forget about the desires that lead to the stumbling. And of course, the consequences that come later. Just knowing that doesn't change the decisions we choose to make, nor does knowing that when we're honest with ourselves and open to others and strong in resisting, we're still the ones on the firing line, and ultimately we're going to stand and fall on our own. But maybe if we have a better idea about why it's easy to stumble into immorality and how we might actually become steadier on our feet, then maybe, just maybe, we'll have fewer regrets as we move into the future. Amen.